The airport was too bright for 4:30 a.m. Cold light bounced off sterile tile. A woman's voice echoed overhead, offering instructions nobody listened to. The only thing moving fast was anxiety. Gate 19 was packed. Delays. Overbookings. Coffee lines long enough to test faith. At the back of the gate area sat a girl named Alina. Early 20s. Black hoodie, worn backpack, nervous hands. She kept checking her phone, no new messages. Just the boarding pass for Flight 392 to Boston. She hugged her violin case tight. 2 rows over, a TSA supervisor leaned against the desk. Thick-necked. Earpiece. Sunglasses on indoors. Nameplate, J. Keller. He watched her. Didn't blink. The boarding line started to move. Slowly. First-class passengers, then business. Alina stepped into the queue, head down. "Ma'am," Keller said, loud enough for everyone to hear. "Step aside." She froze. What?" He nodded to another uniformed officer. "Secondary screening. Random check." Her voice was small. "I already went through security." "You were flagged by the algorithm," Keller said, gesturing vaguely at a tablet. "Please cooperate." Alina looked at the people staring. At the gate agent trying not to look at all. "May I ask what I did?" Keller smiled thinly. "You bought a one-way ticket. Cash. That's irregular. Plus your ID is from out of state. We'll just check your belongings. Standard protocol." They pulled her to the side. One of them took her violin case. The other unzipped her backpack and spilled its contents onto the metal table. Toiletries. Sheet music. A crumpled university acceptance letter. Keller rifled through everything with calculated sloppiness. "Student, huh?" he muttered. "Fancy school. Scholarships make it easy for anyone now." Alina looked down. The passengers watched with a mix of curiosity and silence. Not one voice spoke up. Then a man in a blazer whispered, another fake sob story. "Probably trafficking something." Keller smirked. "Open the instrument case," he said. "No," Alina said softly. "What was that?" "No. That violin was my grandfather's. I'm not letting you." Keller reached for it. That's when a new voice entered the scene. Calm. Low. Not loud, but full. "You should let it go." The room turned. An older man stood just inside the gate area. Gray beard. Work boots. Brown canvas jacket. Still as stone. His hands were in his pockets, but his presence was louder than any shout. Keller turned. "Sir, this doesn't concern." She said no, the man replied. Keller squinted. "Do you have any idea what jurisdiction you're interfering with?" The man stepped forward. "I'm not interfering," he said. "I'm warning you." Passengers shifted in their seats. Something primal passed through the air, like animals sensing the weather turning. Alina stared. "Who are you?" Keller asked. The man pulled out his ID. The TSA agent froze. Because it didn't say passenger. It said, Federal Security Consultant. Underneath the name, Charles D. Norris. Keller opened his mouth. Closed it. Chuck nodded toward the violin case. "Return it." The second officer didn't wait for permission. He gently placed it back on the table and backed away. Chuck turned to Alina. "You all right?" She nodded once. "Barely. Get your things. You're boarding now." He walked her to the gate. Nobody stopped them. Inside the jet bridge, Chuck handed her the violin case. "You hold this tight, understand?" Alina whispered, "Why'd you help me?" Chuck didn't answer right away. Finally, he said, "Because no one else did." Then he turned and walked back toward the terminal, boots echoing across the sti. Chuck watched the plane taxi out from Gate 19 through the thick airport window. Rain misted the glass, softening the yellow runway lights into ghosts. Inside, the crowd had begun to pretend nothing had happened. Phones returned to palms. Earbuds went back in. Everyone remembered how to ignore things. Everyone but Keller. He stood behind the check-in desk now, typing without looking at the screen. His face was tight. His ego had taken a hit in public, and men like him don't forgive that easily. Especially not when the man doing the hitting had used nothing but words and an ID badge. Chuck didn't care. He'd seen men like Keller before. Power without accountability. Righteousness without merit. That kind of man didn't need a badge, he just needed an audience too afraid to look away. Chuck walked to the vending machine and bought a small black coffee. No sugar. No cream. Bitter as war and twice as hot. The woman behind the counter watched him carefully. "You with security?" she asked. "No. You just embarrassed Keller." Chuck sipped the coffee. "Good." She smirked. "Name's Sheila. I work this terminal 5 days a week. I've watched him do that kind of thing to 5 girls this month. Different skin color. Different reasons. Always random selection." Chuck nodded once. "You ever file a complaint?" Sheila laughed bitterly. "Lady who did that last month's now checking baggage in Tulsa. Keller's friends go high up." Chuck's eyes stayed on hers. What if someone wasn't afraid? She looked around. Well, I guess they'd need help. By 7 a.m., Chuck was in the staff wing of the airport, maintenance corridors and dusty break rooms behind false walls. He moved like a man who had been there before. Because he had. Every major airport had quiet places. Shadowed corners, unfinished construction, old freight elevators no one tracked. Chuck used to map them out in his head the moment he landed. Old habits die slowly. He found the locker room. Empty. One locker read, Keller, J. Chuck sat on the bench across from it and waited. It took 20 minutes. The door creaked open. Keller entered, whistling, pulling off his jacket and tossing it inside the open locker. Chuck cleared his throat. Keller froze. "You lost?" he asked. "No. You don't belong back here." Chuck nodded toward the locker. "Neither does that badge." Keller's nostrils flared. "You trying to scare me, old man?" Chuck stood. The room shrank. "I don't scare people," he said. "I remind them." "Of what?" Chuck took a step forward. "That if you touch another kid's belongings, if you humiliate another woman to feel tall, if you twist policy into a weapon, then you'll see me again." Keller opened his mouth, but no sound came out. Chuck walked past him and out the door. No punches. No shouts. Just silence. And the sound of boots on linoleum. Back in the terminal, Sheila handed Chuck a folded envelope. "What's this?" "Her name's Alina Sorry," she said. "I looked up her record. Boarding pass was valid." She was telling the truth. Chuck nodded. "She plays violin?" Sheila added. Chuck smiled slightly. Like an angel with something to prove. "Where's she going?" "Boston." Sheila raised an eyebrow. "Why Boston?" Chuck glanced at the flight board. "To be free." That evening, Keller was escorted into a closed-door review session with airport administration. The official wording, misuse of discretion and procedural deviation under Title 49. By the next morning, he was placed on indefinite leave. By the next week, he was gone. And Alina? She played her first piece on a scholarship stage at Emerson Hall. The violin was clear and bright. And she never let it go again. The sun burned through the fog over Boston. Cold light spilled through the stained glass windows of Emerson Hall, scattering color across the backs of empty seats. Rehearsal wasn't set to begin for another 30 minutes, but Alina was already there, alone on stage, bow in hand. She tuned the violin by ear, not tuner. She liked hearing it settle, listening for the imperfections that made it honest. Professor Green entered quietly from the side wing. "I thought I told you to take a morning off," he said, smiling. Alina shrugged. "Didn't feel right." He sat in the front row, notepad in hand, but didn't write anything. "That performance yesterday," he said. "That was more than music." She nodded. "I was playing for someone," she said. "Family?" She paused. "Sort of." Back in Texas, Chuck stood at a hardware store checkout counter, holding a small box of nails and a bag of concrete patch. The young man at the register kept glancing up. You look familiar," he said. Chuck didn't respond. "You ever on TV or something?" Chuck handed him a 20. The man handed back the change. "Well, anyway. Thanks for your service." "Whatever it was." Chuck nodded. And walked out. By evening, Chuck was back at his quiet ranch house, halfway between nowhere and the past. His boots echoed on the wooden porch. A lone hawk circled above the tree-line. Inside, a single framed photo sat on the mantel. An older man in a uniform. Broad shoulders. Calm eyes. The kind of face that had seen war and still smiled in the kitchen. Chuck poured a cup of black coffee and sat in the chair by the fire. The house was quiet. It had been for a long time. The phone rang. Chuck let it buzz twice before answering. It was Sheila from the airport. "Hope I'm not bothering you," she said. "No. Just thought you should know, Alina's performance is going viral. The video. It's everywhere." Chuck sipped his coffee. "Good. She listed you in the dedication. Just said CN, who reminded me I could stand taller than fear." Chuck didn't say anything. Sheila waited. "You all right?" she asked. "I'm always all right." But his voice said something else. "Look," she said, "I know you're not the type to hang around or stay in touch or even explain yourself, but if you ever need to talk." "I don't," Chuck said. "But if I did," he added after a pause, "I'd talk to someone like you." Then he hung up. That night, he stepped outside under a sky full of hard stars. The air smelled like cedar and dust. Chuck looked out at the distant hills. Somewhere out there, someone else was being pushed down. Humiliated. Alone. And someday soon, he'd be needed again. Not for applause. Not for revenge. Just for balance. And when that day came, he'd be ready. 3 weeks passed. The airport forgot. The gate agents joked. The baggage handlers cussed. The announcement loop restarted every 11 minutes with robotic cheer. But one chair in the break room stayed empty. Keller's locker had been cleaned out. His nameplate removed. A new hire had taken his place, young, polite, nervous. And the rest of the staff? They stood straighter now. Because they'd seen what happens when someone notices. When someone doesn't flinch. Alina's performance had reached 500,000 views. She didn't care about the numbers. What mattered were the messages. A retired music teacher from New Mexico wrote, "You reminded me why I taught." A veteran from Iowa sent, "I used to play violin before the war. Listening to you made me remember my hands." She printed out one message. Taped it to her dorm room mirror. It said, "The world has enough noise. You brought back silence and made it beautiful." Alina knew exactly who wrote it. No sender. No signature. Just an old soul with calloused hands and clear eyes. Chuck stood at the back of the community church in Cedar Hill, Texas. No fanfare. Just worn pews and warm coffee. A handful of veterans shared stories no one else would understand. "Got shot in the leg in '72, one man was saying. Doc told me I'd never walk straight. I said, that's fine. I'll lean." Laughter followed. Not loud, but real. Chuck said nothing. But when the coffee ran low, he refilled the pot. When the youngest veteran dropped his cane, Chuck picked it up before anyone else noticed. And when a widow cried softly in the last row, Chuck handed her a handkerchief, then sat with her until she stopped. No words were exchanged. But something passed between them all the same. That afternoon, Chuck returned to the ranch. He fed the horses, repaired a hinge on the barn door, replaced the fraying rope on the gate. He didn't say much, even to himself. But as he sat on the porch that evening, watching the wind ripple through tall grass like whispers from the past, a car approached. Dust rose. Chuck didn't move. The car parked. A woman stepped out, slim, dark hair pulled back. Violin case in one hand, coffee in the other. Alina. She walked up the path slowly. "You didn't think I'd find you," she said. Chuck gave a slight shrug. "You left your name on nothing," she continued. "But I remembered your face. And I remembered what you told me." She handed him the coffee. Black. No sugar. He took it. "You told me to hold on to the violin," she said. Chuck nodded. "You did." She smiled. "You were right. It saved me." He gestured to the second chair on the porch. "Sit," he said. She did. The wind blew gently. And for a moment, neither of them needed to talk. Because sometimes, balance isn't something you fight for. Sometimes, it's something you wait for. And sometimes, it finds its way back to you.